Hi, this is Paul. I am back from my trip out east, and this is the poetry and question and answer that followed the presentations of day two. I'm taking those two things and putting them together because it really ran together in the conference, and the material is very similar in terms of its content and the speakers, so I thought they nicely sort of ran together. And then the last one that I will post, I don't know when. I'm going to be on the road again tomorrow, so we'll see what comes in terms of rough draft for Sunday and some of those other weekend things. I don't know. I just wrote most of my Sunday sermons, so I've got that underway. So yeah, this is the poetry by Sherry and Michael and Graham, and then the question and answer that then includes Nate and Rafe from day two of the Northwestuary conference.
Hello? Okay. I wrote this a few days ago, or no, a few weeks ago now. And it was going through my head while I was listening to Mr. Graham and Mr. Martin and Chris Green, especially the last line. Where's Chris? Oh, did he? And Rafe. So I don't know if I want to say more than that. I'll just read what I wrote. And this is like a real encounter. I also thought it went well with the whole idea of, face-to-face encounters, right? I first noticed you, it's called The Summer of the Snake. I first noticed you when I went to pump out the pond. The water had been stagnant for some time and needed refreshing, and as the pump worked to lower the water level, you swam along the edges, looking for a way out. I thought you were stuck. You quickly showed me that you were not. The following day, I continued my work on the pond, and as I stepped towards the edge, you swam quickly and curiously towards me, and then disappeared under the water and into some rocks. I wondered if you could be without air that long. I wondered why you swam so knowingly towards me, and I wondered what the chances were that I would see you 2 days in a row. You were big, bigger than any garter snake I had ever seen, and you somehow emanated a sense of ownership over the pond, as if it was yours, and I was the intruder. I left you head first in the rocks with the tip of your tail sticking out, underwater. I suppose the snake knows what it is doing, was my thought. My first thought was that perhaps you needed saving, but that was quickly abandoned as I watched you navigate the pond with ease. Each day as I returned to the pond, you were there, sometimes outside the pond, and then upon my arrival slithering into the water to keep a watchful eye on me. And sometimes I caught a flash of you as you swam gracefully underwater, head moving slowly side to side, scooping up shrimp and larvae. There were so many places you could hide in the pond, but every day I saw you, because as I have come to realize, you wanted me to see you. You always placed yourself in close proximity, but just far enough away to avoid most of my human tendencies. It seemed to me after a time that my instincts were less under control than yours were. I was the animal, you the observer. Crossing the footbridge one afternoon to the garden next to the pond, you suddenly poked your head out between the boards where they met the grass. I paused, as did you. "Hello," I said. It seemed that after these watery encounters, suddenly here we were, quite face to face on land. As I stood still, you took the opportunity to slither out completely, and then made a quick turn towards the grass. I followed your tail because I know from childhood that that is the only part of a snake that the eye can follow. And just before your tail disappeared in the grass, it was joined by another snake's head. But wait, no, it was your head as it glided past your tail, and then the tail disappeared only to reappear as you headed for the water. How deceptive, I thought. My head couldn't keep up with my eyes, and my eyes felt like audience members in a great magic show. And suddenly, I felt like Eve, meeting a snake in the garden, not being afraid, and also being quite deceived. I didn't know what it all meant, but I felt I had experienced something existential, something transcendent. I'm still thinking about it. I probably will for a long time. I don't think it matters, really, finding out what it all means. I think it only matters that I was there, and you showed me what it felt like. I haven't seen you since. It has been a couple of weeks. We did have some cooler weather until yesterday. I walked back to the footbridge and brought my feet down hard on it, knocking, I suppose, to see if you were home, hoping for that same encounter, but knowing that these things only happen once. Then something did happen. A small baby garter snake came up from the same hole you did that day and found its way along the boards of the footbridge, heading in the direction of the pond. And then I wondered, were you also Mother?
I got it, girl. This one is called The Blue God, because I figured, I heard people saying there's been a lot of Christian stuff going on here, so I figured I'd read a poem about a Hindu god that will get me in trouble with the Ortho Bros for sure. Anathema! So there we go. The Blue God. It is early to work the scythe, but the moist, cool air hangs thick and still, and no dew dampens my boots. A storm approaches from the east, and I hope it will end this drought. The pastures are dry and sparse, and the cow has little to graze, which is why I cut marsh grass in its greenness this morning. I remember seeing him, the giant, blue and fierce, his sharpened sword lifted aloft, riding a white horse across Lake Huron from Ontario. I was 25 then, and it was at the beginning of the end of all things. The barn swallows and starlings do not fly above the meadow today, but I see a flurry of ants pillage the grease of the larvae of a fallen paper wasp's nest I crushed under Hile on the porch steps yesterday. Thus we all, intended or not, contribute to the perpetual cycling of death and life. I wash out the stainless steel compost bucket to rid the plague of fruit flies that has menaced us in the kitchen these past days, and I see a sticker on the underside I had never paid attention to before. Made in India. This makes me laugh. He looked angry as he crossed the lake, waves churning around the horse's cannons, the wind rushing in its mane. Well, maybe not angry, but severe, focused, commissioned, foreboding. After I hit a black walnut sapling with a clang, the scythe begs for sharpening. I set the snath's head on a boulder covered in dead grass and then sweep the honing stone along the dulled blade to set the burr. That dream I had last night, what was it? I remember. A voice that troubled the wind as I milked a she-deer on a winter's night in the forest. The pail buried in snow, steam rising from the milk while the clustering stars threw sparks through a hole in the deep canopy. He made me a sharp-edged sword and hid me in the shadow of his arm. But I wonder what he was telling me, the blue god, as he disturbed the Huron, moving west. This was in the summer of 1987, before Tiananmen Square, before Berlin, before we found ourselves placed in the possession of the archons, before we were digitized, before we were silenced, before we were formed in the image and likeness of a digital god in a garden of nothing. I hear deep thunder as the storm comes creeping closer, and realize it is time I finish this scythe work. There is no wisdom in tempting nature, no matter how poetic the blade one holds. And yet I wonder if the blue god still breaks the waves of the universe. He who will kill by the millions the thieves and the rogues who have dared to dress as kings in this age of darkness. If you're bummed out, please let me know.
This is a psalm, so I have to stand up. I hope that's okay. You can't.
Should we all stand, Greg?
You guys can do what you want. I have to stand up to read it. You guys just hang out. That's fine. This weekend has meant so much to me. That's not part of the poem. I'm just telling you now why. Thank you all so much for sharing the depths of yourself with each other, with me. And then a little side note to help with the psalm. With the Hebrew, the name of the divine, which you're not supposed to pronounce in its fullness, I just say Yah, the first half. And Rafe mentioned that the name of the God is like the breath, Yahweh, like the in-breath and out-breath. So when you hear Yah, that's what I'm doing there. Okay, so this is a version of Psalm 71. And I'm really sad that my estuary group is over. So that's what I'm dealing with. In you alone, Yah, do I take refuge. So don't let me wither away like sepia reeds rattling at the edge of a vanished stream. Take me into your shade. In the cool shadows of harmony with you, let me escape. As the white petals of the desert windflowers tilting sunward in the breeze, incline your ear to the whispers of my voice and come and rescue me. For you alone are my flint megalith, my only temple, and to you alone do I ever return, as if to a vast emptiness, into the coolness of your shadows, where your voice is serene in the darkness, a refreshing breeze. You are my citadel, my tower of rock. Let me evade, my highest one, the grasp of the wandering and the lost, and escape the clutches of the blood-stained and polluted, whose faces are scrunched up and bloodied from years of lapping the rancid oasis of cruelty. For you are my only hope, Yah, my only king. And to you alone do I cling, like a little one clinging to his father, as my only safety and my confidence. It's you who's held me up and led me by the hand ever since I left my mother's womb. You yourself, my highest one, who severed me from my mother's body and carried me into the daylight like a bundle of grass from the earth freshly scythed. And now I'm reaching upward for your hands. I'm holding my hands palm upward in the sky and singing for you, Father, because my life has meaning when I'm like that. A sign to the wandering masses that you alone have become my refuge and my fortress. So let my mouth overflow day by day with songs of your shining greatness and of the honor which adorns you like the blossoms of a tree. You, the loveliest of kings, arrayed in garlands of living flowers. Don't rip me away from yourself when I'm dried out and wilted, tossed away in the darkness of senescence, when the wind of time blows and my petals fall to the ground. For those who rip up this tent and point my own tent poles at me like spears, string words together against me in my own head. Those who lie in wait for my inmost breath, standing like a mirage of trees and whispering in my mind's shadows, the highest one has left him. Let us pursue him and take him. Then let us stretch him out and beat him like a tambourine, since no one will come to the rescue. O highest one, don't be far away like that. Elohe, my high one, run to my side and be my nearest helper, that in your sunlight they might wither up like grass, those twisting themselves like thorns against me. As the bright-winged falcon suddenly drops from the sky, snatch them away in your talons and pierce their hearts, for they're trying to destroy me. And outside in the scorching sun, I will wait to feel your wings as the cool breezes of twilight, waving my hands in the sky as the many-fingered branches of the palm, singing praises to you, green again and ever shining, singing in the sapphire sky of the beauty of your infinite harmonies and your endless mercies. I'm going to and fro in the warrior strength flowing from Yahweh Adonai, always mindful of harmony with you, the soul fiber of my being. You have been my shepherd since my youth, O highest one. I've been face to face with your own creative power. And now in the twilight of this age, ashen and reeling from vertigo, don't leave me here alone until I've showed this generation the face of your warrior strength also. That harmony with you is high and lifted up, my high one, my tower, who has created majestic things and who has shown me great anguish and soul-crushing distress also. Who will turn me towards life once again and lift me up from the abyss of the earth, amplifying my presence and surrounding me on all sides in a flourishing oasis of solace. I'll strum the zither in praise of you, my highest one. Your faithfulness will I pluck with the harp. O Israel's Holy One, my lips will shout for joy, singing loudly of how you ransomed my inmost breath, my tongue cooing like a dove, meditating, murmuring, wind-like to the flowers about the joy of harmony with you.
Do I stay here? Do I stay here?
Luke went to go get him. So I wasn't planning on doing this, but while Luke's getting the questions anyway. Oh, yeah. So the one thing about this conference that I wish I had been able to do, but wasn't because of my mom's health, was I would have loved to have my mom come out here and sing for you. And so this is a poem I wrote probably 25 years ago, just reflecting on my mom and her singing. And I think it really touches on the theme of this conference, so I'm going to go ahead and share it. It's called When Mama Sings. When Mama was a little girl, she'd climb up a pecan tree and spend the whole day just singing up there in the treetops. Most folks thought she sang like a beautiful bird, but not her own mama or her granny. She'd climbed that tree to get away from them in the first place, away from the rules. Don't you know that girls who wear shorts go to hell? Stop that singing. That's the devil's music. Up in that pecan tree, she could just sing. God's music, the devil's music. Didn't matter to Mama. To her, it was just music. It was in her and wanted to get out. Didn't matter if anyone was there to listen or not. Mama doesn't climb pecan trees anymore, but Mama still sings. Mama always sings. Sings early in the morning when sane folks are still in bed. I think God made us to sing in the morning, just like the birds. Some mornings it made me understand why some folks shoot birds. But most of the time, I like it when Mama sings. If you go to a karaoke bar around here, you're bound to run into her. Most of the time, she wouldn't stand out. Just another middle-aged woman out to escape the humdrum of a life that never turned out the way she wanted. Sure, you might say she has a lovely voice, but you'd walk away unchanged. But then again, sometimes, if the mood is right, and the song is right, it's just like when she was a little girl up in that pecan tree, She's not singing for you. She's not even really singing for her. She's just singing because she's mama. If you catch her on one of those nights, and if you close your eyes and listen, when mama sings, you hear the voice of God.
Somebody want to pretend and do Chris's?
I am surrogate Chris Green.
Okay,
Oh, nice. Does Jesus, quote, consummate the Aaronic blessing? It is more important that Jesus looks upon Peter, that Peter looks upon Is it more important that Jesus looks upon Peter, that Peter looks upon Jesus, or is it most important that they see each other? All of the above, something else?
All of the above. The lover's gaze.
How do you understand the relationship between violence and beauty in war? Is genuine virtue / beauty afforded to the properly oriented person in the chaos / hell of war? And then reading suggestions on the topic, if you can think of any. So that's, I guess, just for everybody.
I happen to have an extensive experience with martial arts, so maybe I have some thoughts on that. I'm actually struck by something somebody said, can't remember, sorry, in one of our conversations, maybe on the first night, actually, about a Sikh guru who was burned to death. And as he died, he sang and celebrated God's will. I have a friend named Rory Miller who wrote an amazing book called Meditations on Violence. He served for 20 years in a maximum security correctional facility. He had over 500 use of force incidents in the first 10 years. Then he stopped counting. It's an amazing book. Highly recommend it. But one thing he says is, right now, we treat violence the way they treated sex in the 1950s. We don't recognize how much it's taboo and how much it structures our reality. Every law that we have exists because it can be enforced. Which is one reason why you might consider some element of libertarianism. Because do you really want that to be enforced at the end of a gun, whatever that is? But as difficult as it may seem, we have to accept that beauty can spring from violence. Because we all spring from violence. Omar Khayyam was famously translated, at least, as saying, "I sometimes never think the rose bleeds so red as where some buried Caesar bled. And every hyacinth the garden bears brings its petals from some once lovely head." I've experienced violence. I've been beaten. I've been sexually abused, and the reality of it is pretty terrible. I don't want to glorify it. And I've been on the other side and delivered violence, and that too is very. I sat with my son. I was talking about violence with my son recently, and I was telling him a story of when I was in second grade. I was really struggling. I had a lot of hard things happening in my life at that time. And I was in a new school because I had disabilities, and I had made a new best friend, and he was not in my class, right? We were in separate classes in the second grade class, and a boy from his class came up to me and said, "He's not your best friend. He's my best friend." And I knocked him down and grabbed the back of his head and smacked his face off the concrete. Split his nose and lip open. And I've remembered that story for years and years and years. And it wasn't until I told my son it that I was like, holy shit. I was 7 years old. That is so insanely violent. Like, what was wrong with that kid who did that? You know, you become inured to it, but to actually face your own capacity for malevolence, that was shaking, because do I want my son to think that that's okay? To think that it's something to be proud of? I don't know. Now I'm just lost. There are some evocative ideas and images for you. Play with them as you will.
Yes. No, I mean, that's my answer. I don't know what to think about violence. I mean, I'm not necessarily a violent person, but I kill things for a living sometimes of the year. Well, I do, right? And so I think, I mean, I talk about this with people who are farmers who do have to take lives at times. Don't take it lightly. Not gratuitously. It's very different than maybe the violence you see pent up in cities, for instance. And I struggled for a long time because I thought that I was a Christian pacifist. Apparently I'm not. And you know, because I would actually go through, and you have a lot of kids and, you know, you're gone a lot. You worry about what if something happens to them. You have to struggle, wow. You know, and I would talk to a priest who was a Christian pacifist. He goes, well, you just got to pray. I'm like, okay. But I finally concluded that, you know, it's kind of, and I think I heard it echoed in Jordan Peterson, who I hadn't talked about, but when he said something not too long ago where, you know, unless you're potentially violent as a man, you're not doing anybody any good, right? Because the issue is to contain it, is to be the master of it. And I got to the point finally. It took a long time to get. It was like doing house church. It took me a long time to get there, where I decided, well, you know what? If somebody came into my house and was attempting to hurt my wife and my children, one of us is going out in a body bag, you know. Which I don't like to even think about that, but I think you have to, as a protector, as someone responsible for people, you have to do some things once in a while that are unpleasant, and hopefully I never have to do that. I never want to do that, right? But if I had to do it, I know now I could do it. But, you know, 15, 20 years ago, I wasn't sure I could. And what I've wrestled with, and I wrote about this recently in my Substack, maybe a month or two ago, is that maybe I was wondering if maybe my Christian pacifism was really a way to excuse my cowardice, right? So, I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, you know, that sounds good to me. That way, it's not my fault. You know what I mean? But I think we're all implicated. And I know as a farmer now, right, that, you know, there is violence in the world, but with hunting in particular, which is something I love to do. But I don't take it lightly. In fact, my dad, when we were kids, you know, said, son, when you take an animal's life, the first thing you do is pray to God in thanksgiving, and you thank the animal, right? Because the kind of sacredness with which you approach, not killing, but the sustaining of life is very different than having to kill something to defend. You know, well, I should. And some of you said this. Every day, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I pray Psalm 82. Right, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. Right, Defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. And I take those words seriously, not as a vigilante, but as, and so I don't know what, as a person where I am right now. So
Nate, I just want to read this section again.
Oh, wait a minute a second. I want to say a word for the pacifists.
Okay.
So, I think that I completely identify with everything you're saying, and I think I think particularly as men, our every natural intuition and instinct leads in that direction, and I don't think that pacifism requires the elimination of all force altogether whatsoever, but I do think that we are called to use the minimum force necessary.
So far I'm doing that, just want to let you know.
Oh, I know you are. I know you're a man of peace, and no doubt about it. I just wanted to speak up for the pacifists, and the fact that it seems difficult to us, or even impossible to us, should not deter us, because I think Tom Burke has it right when he says in Meditations on the Tarot that the only free things that we ever do are impossible things. And the specific example he points to as an impossible thing is to love your enemies. So let's not give up on pacifism altogether.
I wanted to just briefly say one more thing about this, which is another thing that Rory talked about, which is when a culture becomes blind to violence, as Jordan would say, right, you have to be a monster and then have it contained. But the thing is that when you look at people who've been victimized, very often what you'll find is that they didn't have permission inside themselves when the moment came to defend themselves. So one of the first things he says in confronting violence is, know what you would be willing to fight for. Know what you would be willing to hurt for. Know what you would be willing to kill for. And if you don't, then whoever wants to can just take what they want from you. We are here because our fathers and mothers before us were willing to die and to kill that we could be. And it's not nice. We don't like to think about it. Violence scares us, but it's real. And beauty does arise from it. So, absolutely, the least necessary force. I worked as a bouncer for 3 years, and I never struck anybody or used a joint lock or a strangulation on anybody. I was always able to solve the situation. But still, somebody has to solve the situation.
Since I'm surrogate Chris Green here, this is the perfect opportunity to talk to. We have to be, I don't disagree with you at all, but we have to be aware of the temptation, particularly in our culture, of the myth of redemptive violence. It's so built into our storytelling. It's the iconic Western scenario where you have the good bad man or the bad good man who is actually outside the community, who the good Christian folks have to turn to in order to right some terrible wrong and to use might for right in a way that they can't themselves if they're to remain good Christian people. So I think it's a great storytelling pattern because it forces us to confront all of the complexity as a Christian culture that violence involves for us. And so, and we have to remember that temptation. It's very easy to convince yourself that your use of might is for right, but oftentimes you're deluding yourself.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Okay, this says, please ask any or all. What does contrition feel like? Can you be forgiven for ongoing selfishness / self-focused living? How? How does Christ's judgment work?
Finally, an easy question.
He waits for you to let go of the last further. I mean, I'm the universalist, so you know how I'm going to answer this question. God gets what he wants eventually, and he wants you. And it's delusional to think that you can deny God forever. Yeah, right, exactly. He won't allow you to persist in your selfishness forever. Eventually, you'll meet his gaze.
Well, why don't we just tackle the first question then now? What does contrition feel like?
I think I have some sense of that. There was this conversation that happened early on about the idea of the harrowing of hell, right? That Christ had harrowed hell. And I had run into this idea recently that we have to understand the fires of Gehenna as alchemical flames that transmute us into gold. And what I experienced in my MDMA trip was everything I didn't want to experience. But I had the strength to walk through it, I think now, because I felt the capacity to love at a far deeper level than I had felt before. And so the idea that came to me when someone said the harrowing of hell is that if one was truly aligned with that divine love, that the harrowing of hell is joyful. And so when I had to look at everything that I had ever done wrong to my wife and every way that I had failed to meet her and failed to see her and failed to love her, it was really painful, but it was not shaming. It was freeing, because the view that I took on the person who I was seeing myself failing and the person who was failing them, was ultimately rooted in love.
I did a video on Grail Country quite a while back with Laura Freeburn, who I wish could have been here. Wonderful woman, frequent Grail Country contributor. And I audaciously entitled that conversation, Jordan Peterson Was Harrowing Hell. And I meant what I said. I meant that. I mean, it was it was somewhat hyperbolic, but I really meant it. And you can see what I meant. I believe it was Chris during his talk today, who talked about how we need to see the face of Christ in all faces. So our work as Christians is to, like Christ, harrow hell. And Jordan Peterson, even though he wasn't a Christian, was bringing people out of a place of literal hell, out of darkness into light. And so I have plenty of disagreements with Jordan, but I will always appreciate him for doing that.
Okay, hands, by a show of hands, who has read Elizabeth George Spears' book, The Bronze Bow?
Oh my gosh, I have.
Girl, go, you go.
There's a story about that. I can't even believe you brought that up. Oh my goodness.
Tell me if it... Okay. Come on up here. The Holy Spirit told me to say that, but... So here you go, come here. Come on up. But I'm going to tell my story first. So that was a book I would read to my kids, and which means I read it at least 9 times. And there's a scene in it where the protagonist of the story, a boy named Daniel, who's pissed because the Romans killed his parents, which caused his sister to lose her mind, and he's been driven to the zealots, and he just wants revenge on these bastards. And then his friend Simon, the zealot, tells him about this Jesus guy. He said, I don't know about the sons. I don't like what I saw here. But he goes, I'm going to check it out anyway. He goes to check it out, and he sees Jesus healing people, and he's well, sounds okay, but I don't know. And I always cry when I tell this. I open and cry. Every time I read this to the kids, I would die. Daddy, you okay? No, shut up. But what happens is they're at Peter's house, and Jesus is healing people. But Jesus goes inside after he heals a bunch of people. Jesus is tired, but Daniel waits out in the courtyard with some other people. The other people fall asleep, but Daniel is too pissed to fall asleep. And he's sitting there watching the door, and at like 1 in the morning or something, Jesus comes out. And he walks over and he comes to talk to this kid. He said, tell me about yourself. And the kid says, well, this, I'm mad at the Romans because this happened to my parents, and my sister's crazy, and he's going. And Jesus lets me talk. And Jesus says, at the end of it goes, you're not far from the kingdom. And that's what contrition feels like. Get the microphone.
Is it on?
Yep. Pick it up.
Okay. One day, about 15 years ago, I had a dream that I was in a library and I saw a book on the shelf, and all I could see on the spine of it was Elizabeth George Spear. And I woke up and I said, oh, well, that's odd. I haven't thought about Elizabeth George Spear since 5th grade, when I had a project where we had to write to our favorite author, and since Laura Ingalls Wilder was dead, and so was Louisa May Alcott, I wrote to Elizabeth George Spear and told her that I really liked her stories. And so here I was, an adult with a little baby, and I was pregnant with another one, and I had this dream about Elizabeth George Spear. And I said, well, that's odd, but we're going to the library today for library playtime, and I'll go check out those books that I really liked when I was in 5th grade. And I went and I looked, and I didn't realize it, but our school library didn't carry The Bronze Bow, so there was a new book for me to read. So I went home and I read that one, and I, for some reason, was captivated by the psalm which the title comes from. And for some reason, I was captivated by the translation for it being The Bronze Bow. And I got online on Bible Hub or something that would give you a variety of different translations. And it was always some type of metal. It was bronze or it was copper or something like that. But I just didn't feel right about those translations. So I searched more and more and more, and I found that there is one translation by Mitchell Dahoud, done by Anchor Bible, and he had translated as the miraculous bow, and he had made a connection to the Ugaritic tale that this. I don't want to go into the whole Ugaritic tale or anything, but that opened my eyes to translation and to the guidance of the Holy Spirit in ways that are still affecting me today. So much so that yesterday, after Graham was telling us about his little boy seeing the rainbow in the sky, I was driving home and realized, oh, that's cachette, that's bow. It's the form, it's the shape. It's the characteristic in Hebrew is based on the form and the shape, not so much the colors, which we tend to think of it as. And I have no idea where any of the story is going, except that I am so blown away that something that happened so many years ago, even started back in 5th grade, just this thread that has winded throughout the years of my life, bringing me right here and amongst all of you in the culmination of this. And to me, that is very much the Holy Spirit and his miraculous bow. So,
Amen.
thank you.
Thank you. So, actually, to go back to our question, when was the last time I heard the Holy Spirit? Just now.
So this is from Ephrael. Can Rafe please lead us in singing Stand By Me?
Oh, God. That's not a great idea. I mean, I can do it, but I'm not sure everyone's going to enjoy it. Singing is my wife's skill.
So
You guys
Tracy,
want this to happen?
my sister can actually lead us in singing Stand By Me. Yeah, she played it last night at the farmhouse, and
Come on up, Tracy, come on.
come on, there's a guitar here somewhere, right?
Yeah.
There is.
This is a much better idea than me doing it.
Sherry, hearing Sherry talk to Sherry.
Benny King, Stand By Me. Benny King, Stand By Me.
No, I don't know that.
You don't know Stand By Me?
Come on. I have a different version of Stand By Me. That's not what they're asking for.
No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. Now, darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
Stand by me.
Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble to the sea, no, I won't be afraid. No, I won't shed a tear. Just as long as you stand by me. Stand by me, and darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
thanks, Rafe.
You guys really want to challenge me.
What a strange coincidence.
So that's way worse for me.
What are your most optimistic hopes for human development and community in the age of AI?
I think we can have Holy Spirit technology and we should give up on the pessimism.
I think AI may be a sufficient catastrophe that will fundamentally break us from the assumption that the techno-scientific worldview will save us.
Door two, Alex. I mean, I got a million thoughts about this, and I don't want to. I have written books about this, actually. I think. Well, I don't. I mean, I don't. You never know, but I think the archons or the technocracy is getting to the point where it's going to implode on itself. And I hope, and I was actually thinking this today, that, and I don't know if you know this guy, this Belgian thinker, Michel Bouwens. I don't know how he got interested in my work, but people said this economist guy is really into what you're doing. And he lives in Thailand now, but we communicate every once in a while. And he's got this idea of the digital commons, which he thinks Which was when the internet came out. Remember how it was fun? Yeah, and
do.
Google wasn't monitoring you, and the government wasn't in there. That was fun, right? And so Michelle thinks that we, and I've benefited from this greatly. I mean, all the wonderful books I've swiped from archive.org. I love that, right? When I did my dissertation, it was just when Google Books came out, so I was able to get all these books in Latin that were published in the 16th and 17th century that just a few years before I would have had to go visit at a rare books library, like visiting somebody in prison, where you got the guard sitting there watching you in case you crease a page. That's a fun way to do research. So I think there's that part that's the good part, and how I met these guys, But on the other hand, I hope that it breaks down enough to allow, actually, this is the part that's up to us, because you could just, the problem with that is it makes you kind of fat and lazy, because you're like, oh, I'm just going to let the internet do it. Just, where you could, there's the digital commons, but there's also the commons, right? Where I live in rural Michigan, for instance, there's this kind of network of people who actually know how to do stuff, like blacksmiths, and people have, it's against the law to sell raw milk in Michigan, so we have this way to get around it, calling a herd share. So we have this network of subversives who do that kind of stuff. We also work a lot with the Amish, who are wonderful butchers and processors, and get feed from them. So there's this kind of alternative economy, and it's not just in Michigan; it's many different places, right? But on the other hand, you have the other pressure from the archons, the government, the World Economic Forum, those kinds of people that's trying to create. So this commons I'm describing in our rural Michigan community, which could be stronger, but it's present, right? It's a real thing. That is much different than the 15-minute cities being tried to impose from above, right? Like, yeah, you can and we'll monitor you. If you go outside of that, we'll tax you, right? Or you'll pay a fine. That is a very different thing than trying to be local and doing it from the grassroots. And I think that also applies to ecclesial structures. Now, it's not probably all Protestant churches are pretty much like that already, but the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, you got this, and the Anglican Church, but some of the other, like the Lutheran Church, they have stronger administrative bodies that call bishops and stuff. But I think there's a way for a grassroots to rejuvenate or rehabilitate or renew is probably the better way to think of it. The experience of church and of Christianity, but also the experience of the secular sphere, where people work together without the laziness and implicit in the technic structure, which allows, I think, for what Martin Heidegger, in his writings about poetry, one of the things I was going to say this morning, but I decided not to, was that poets sing the traces of the fugitive gods. And I think you see that also in those kinds of alternative economic structures, like I described in where I live. It's following the traces of the fugitive gods, which means a fugitive sacredness, but we're on the case, right? And there's really something beautifully spiritual about this too, right? And not only practically with the health benefits and with the learning skills benefits that go with that, but it's ultimately redemptive, right? And I think it could be, but I think this is the big battle, right? I think this is the battle between the technocrats on the one side and we call them distributists on the other, which is not an adequate word, but there's that's what it seems to be the struggle right now is, and I think that most people don't even know of it as a struggle.
Well, we've been lulled into thinking that somehow that governments and large organizations have a monopoly on cooperation.
And also we're under the assumption that they want to take care of us.
You will own nothing and you will be happy.
Should we?
If I could just paraphrase real quickly.
Yeah.
I think actually what Michael said and what I said were really closely aligned. And I think what I heard was something like, and I'm going to invoke the spirit of a friend of ours here, the existence of the AI and the archons who are trying to control it will necessitate a reinventio of the commons from the bottom up.
Let's go, people. Yo.
All right, so we have 7 more questions. I think for the sake of time, we should maybe be a little more succinct. But
Are you saying we're verbose?
maybe not.
Please,
I
Luke.
love it. Okay, for Rafe, I am as familiar with Dr. Vervaeke's academic work as any. Is this Parlano? With that said, what have you learned from Vervaeke via the intimate relationship you have had the opportunity to cultivate with him? If that's too personal a thing and off limits, can you speak about MDMA therapy more in depth, as I am a fan of the molecule?
And what's his
was.
favorite color?
If talking about your friendship with John Vervaeke is too intimate, how about your experiences with psychedelics? It was very interesting to watch and then, in some sense, participate in John's trajectory towards moderate fame in the wake of Jordan's similar trajectory. I encountered Jordan, as probably many of you did, on the Joe Rogan podcast in November of 2016, and I met him in 2017 and invited him on my podcast, and he said yes, and I was going to fly out to Toronto, but the week that it was supposed to happen was too close to Caitlin's birth, so I didn't do it, and then Jordan went on Kathy Newman, and boom, he exploded. And I watched as Jordan tended to do, and still tends to do, a lot of interviews with very famous people like Matthew McConaughey or Russell Brand, right? And there was a sense of like he's empowering his capacity to reach very far through these brands, but it's also creating a separation, right? It's harder and harder. Once you reach that level of fame, it becomes very hard to filter the many people who want to speak to you. And the people who are not famous are much easier to filter out. So when John came out, and I could see that he had a similar potential to offer so much to the world in the clarity of his vision, philosophically, I was like, I can't miss this one. And I got in touch with John right away, and he was so generous with me, and like as soon as we were done with the podcast, he told me he wanted to talk to me like monthly, and so we've been talking for years. And I love Jordan, and Jordan has been immensely beneficial to me. But I see in Jordan something fragile that wants a little bit more recognition and acknowledgement. And I saw in John a humility that he didn't actually need anything in sharing what he was putting out into the world. And I identify with all the hungers that I saw in Jordan, for sure, 100%. All the pain of feeling like you can't speak in these spaces that are dominated by leftist ideologies, all of the, like, I'm really fucking smart and nobody recognizes me and I should be at this next level of it, and why aren't I talking to Jordan Peterson right now, or Joe Rogan? And so I got it. And then when John was there and he just didn't care, and he just showed up for everybody who showed up for him lovingly, no matter what the size of their channel was, I was like, oh, that's different. And John came out to return to the source, and he fell down and hurt his arm, and I had to basically push John up a slope. Connor and Olivia were there. And he told me, I knew I was going to get hurt when I came out here, but I had to experience it for myself. And I realized that John invests himself in every practice that he can, that he believes has benefit, so he can know it at the participatory level. And that's an exemplar that has meant the world to me. I don't know what to say about it more than that.
I would just like to add, in my experience, John is a very warm person. He gives great hugs. He really does. And he is currently reading Meditations on Matero. So when we do a follow-up series on Meditations on Matero in Grail Country, I strongly hope that we'll be able to get John to be a part of that.
Okay, Nate, I'm going to ask you this question. Could you share some personal experience about, quote, the abundant wealth in spiritual poverty, unquote? Thank you and God bless.
So I'm going to come about this through Douglas Harding, actually. Douglas Harding in The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. He talks about how we can't come into the place where we can make contact with God as so long as we claim ownership of even one particle for ourselves. And Bulgakov, in the text that I shared this morning, like later on in the same introduction, he actually distinguishes that there is a self-love that is proper and godly, and it's a self-love that does not claim ownership. He points to the same thing that Harding does, that it's a self-love that does not claim ownership of anything. So to me, the idea of spiritual poverty is that you don't claim ownership of anything and you accept everything as gift. And so you are able to give away freely and to receive what is given to you in the proper spirit as gift as well. So that's how I would answer that.
Have you heard of Fountain of Comfort? The fountain mixing.
What?
The fountain mixing mental health and spirituality. What? Fountain mixing mental health and spirituality? And would you be willing to donate?
No and no.
I think that's a nerdy insider joke.
Paul, based on Paul's laugh, he has some idea what
thing
it's
or something?
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think Paul's wondering how it got in there.
Well,
Did you guys even screen these? No.
While you find a question, can I tell a quick story?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why I had to tell you the story. So at our retreats, we do this thing where, we're the teachers and we're doing our thing for several days, and we do give lectures and we give talks and we tell stories. At the last night, we asked the students to tell the story of their experience. And we encouraged them to lampoon us. The best one that we ever had, in my opinion, was the year that John Vervaeke was there. Because they got John to be part of it, and he played John Vervaeke. And so we had clans of people that were based on Avatar. So we had the Turtle Ducks and I don't remember all of them, but one of them was the Badger Moles. Were you a Badger Mole, Connor? You weren't one. Okay. So the Badger Moles basically were losing their optimal grip. And they had to be saved. They had to recruit me and Aaron and Kyle, the two other teachers, to come and save their dimension. But in order to do that, they had to get John Vervaeke to come save us. And John had to save, God, I can't remember what was with Kyle, but Aaron was being a sex god teaching yoga. And then I was busy arguing on the internet about Jordan Peterson. And so they were like, he's stuck on the internet arguing about Jordan Peterson stuff. And John's like, oh my God, this again. It's always Jordan. And it was so genuine and beautiful, and John did such an amazing job of playing this character. And David Fuller from Rebel Wisdom was there filming it, and he chose not to film that part. And I was always like, that was the most beautiful thing, because that level of parody and openness would have been the most beautiful thing to share on the internet. So we can't share it. That moment is one of those moments that will have to live in legend, but I really wish that you could have all been there for that.
Well, it'll be remembered forever in the mind of God.
For Rafe, perhaps Michael Martin, if you live in a natural setting that is hostile to people spending time outside, how do we enter into relationship with that place?
Get tougher. They say that, like, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad clothing.
Yeah.
Right? And there's obviously exceptions to this, right? If it's minus 80 and freezing rain, don't go outside and die, right? If it's 160 degrees in, Saudi Arabia, yeah, just hang out inside. But George Hebert, who was one of the great movement teachers, talked about he developed something called méthode naturelle, which was an influence on parkour in my work. But he had this quality that a natural athlete should have that we've forgotten, which he called rusticity. Rusticity is the capacity to adapt to the challenges of the world around us, right? This is such an interesting thing, right? Like, do you feel cold or hot right now, right? You think that that's an objective aspect of the world, right? That your hotness or coldness is associated with a specific temperature as measured by a thermometer, but it's not. It's about your own body's ability to either to create the warmth that it needs or to shed the heat that it needs. And that is something that's trainable. Your capacity to thermoregulate expands when you're exposed to cold and heat. And when you put your hands on a tree, and that tree's bark abrades your hands, your skin grows in strength. Right? When you sit on the ground, your body becomes conditioned to it. When you roll around on the ground, your capacity to bruise your skin grows lower. It's like the world is not so unfriendly to us as we've made ourselves little weak, tissue papers of human beings. Right? Imagine placing your arm in a cast, right? And taking it off 20 years later and being like, why can't it do anything? Why is everything so threatening to it? This room is a cast. You are casted from the intensity of the sun's glare. You're casted from the weather. You're casted from the rain. You're casted from the wind. You're casted from the textures of the ground. How well can you walk up a slope? How well can you adapt to the changes of terrain? There's much more friendliness out in nature than you realize, but you just have to be tough enough to go play.
I'm going to do the Iron Man sociologist deal right here. I just don't even know what a hostile environment is, to tell you the truth. Because we have lambs, and they're black, so they don't like the sun when it gets really hot. And you know what they do? They go into the shade. I know. Write that down. So I don't know what that means. People, one of the reasons I got so into this idea of paying attention to nature is when I was, 25, 24, I read a book by Rudolf Steiner called Cosmic and Human Metamorphosis, and he said in there that if one pays attention over the course of a year to all the subtle changes in nature, over the course of that year, one can encounter the Christ in a way. And I was like, challenge accepted. And so that's what I do every day. That's why it's so disorienting to be in Olympia, Washington for these last 4 days, because I'm off my game paying attention to the subtle changes in nature in Waterloo Township, Michigan. But it's amazing. I challenge you, try it. It doesn't have to be all day in a sweat lodge or anything. You just go out there and just pay attention every day, and the smells. One of my favorite things is to pay attention to what birds are singing, or one of the things I really pay attention to is when the barn swallows arrive and when they leave. And one of the things we do in our family, we've been doing it since my oldest kids were little, is we start taking bets in February about when the tree frog or the spring peepers will start to call. So we're like, when do you think it's going to be? I think it's going to be St. Patrick's Day. I think it's going to be, right? So we do that kind of stuff. So, and I did that as kind of self-imposed homework. When you're a Waldorf teacher, the best kind of homework is the self-imposed kind, where they start paying attention, you know? That's all you want them to do, and that's all we should do. And, of course, in this insulated environment here, and our insulated environments in general, but we're not in prison, right? You can go out for at least a little bit and pay attention every day. I mean, my favorite time to do that is in the morning, before the cares of my day get all over me, depending on whether I have to work outside or not, because I spend a lot of time editing, so I have to be inside. But every day I'm outside. I'm working with the animals. I'm working, for a little bit, not the whole day necessarily. At different times of the year, it's different. It doesn't take much. Slow and steady wins the race. Because you think, I'll never be able to do all this stuff. One day at a time. Slow and steady wins the race.
If I could say one more relatively succinct thing. I suspect most of you guys in here are theists of one kind or another, at least non-theists. How many of you are familiar with the fine-tuning argument? Right? Okay. So think about the fine-tuning argument and how finely tuned the universe is in its laws such that you can exist. And then realize that you live here on Earth, where you have a magnetosphere and you have an atmosphere and you're in the Goldilocks zone, right? And you have plenty of water. This environment is what you arose out of and what you are for. And so it is hostile to you to the degree that you separate yourself from it.
Yeah, okay, this is the last question, and this is for Rafe. I've been sedentary for 30 years. What's the movement starter?
Walk.
There you go.
It's the thing is, right, you had to walk in the past. You didn't have cars, you didn't have bikes, you didn't have trains, you didn't have planes. Hunter-foragers walk on average 5 to 10 miles a day. How much do you walk when you're farming?
I don't know. I never counted. I'm not one of those.
Well, just how much of your day do you spend walking around?
Depends on the time of year.
Okay. Well, thanks for the tight answer there. But the point is that you have to walk, right? If you're going to shear the sheep, you walk there, right? My family property is not a farm, but it's an orchard, right? And there's 12 acres. You go to the pond to go for a swim. You go to the sauna to go take a sauna. You go pick apples. You go pick blackberries. You just pick up steps all day long, right? It's amazing for me to watch my kids. We'll take them up there, and they roam. And they're just running and playing. And they roam so far because they have an uninterrupted 360-degree access to nature within eyesight of the house. And then we go back to Bellingham to the house that we live in, and we have this circumscribed backyard, which is a nicely sized backyard for a suburban house, but they just can't roam. And they just don't walk as much. They just don't, it's just not there. It's just not calling them forth. So one of the first things to realize is that you are in an environment that is taking away this thing, which is just walking, and that it is incredibly fundamental to your health, your heart health, your heels. You walk 10,000 steps a day, you're going to burn 400 extra calories. That's a huge part of why everybody's overweight, is because we don't walk. That's why they're not overweight in France, because they walk. And if you try to start with a CrossFit workout and you start puking and you're having a terrible time, like so many people start with like some super crazy program and then they hate it and then they don't go back because we've learned that movement is drudgery. But generally, almost everybody feels better after taking a walk. And if you go for a walk in nature, you're invited into a relationship with the natural world and you can take a moment to pay attention to the birds. So I always say take a walk, breathe, sit down, be present with nature. And then when you look out at the whole world of physical culture, don't wait to get fit to do the things that you love. Find whatever makes you fall in love with movement and start there and build everything up to support it. If what you love is tango dancing, tango dance. And when you get tired and your feet hurt from tango dancing, now you've got motivation to go strength train. Right? If what you love is doing handstands, do that, whatever it is, but start from love.
We have the closing remarks and then the live
And then I have an announcement after.
Oh, okay. Actually, speaking of announcements, there's another thank you that I wanted to give before we end. I just wanted to thank Maria Proviance, Jess's wife, who has also been behind the scenes taking care of so many things that we may not have noticed, but were very important and needed doing. And thank you, Maria, so much for coming and being such a great help. So now we're going to bring the rest of our speakers up. So we have the full panel up here, and this will be they're going to get a chance to make their closing remarks about their closing thoughts for the conference. And then as soon as they've done that, then we have the wireless mic over here. You'll be able to come up and ask your questions. So.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad. Daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us. Baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing. Ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. When you ever grow up, you look like you're stuck. You think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show, Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.